January 1945, near Metz, France. Lieutenant James Carter checked fuel inventories inside a frozen manor house. Snow covered the road outside. The windows rattled all night. 200 American soldiers slept inside the estate. Most had not changed socks in 6 days. 43 men already carried frostbite bandages around their boots. The nearest wood shipment sat 18 miles away. The fire started just after midnight, not in the fireplace, in the center of the ballroom. A black grand piano leaned sideways across broken marble tiles while its carved legs burned inside a feeding pit beneath crystal chandeliers. Ivory keys cracked in the heat. Smoke rolled across oil paintings hanging above the staircase. A corporal stopped at the doorway first. Then 2 engineers walked in behind him. Nobody spoke for several seconds. One soldier pushed another piano panel deeper into the flames with a rifle barrel. Another held his hands over the fire, without looking up. The room smelled like ash and wet wool by dawn. Photographs of the burned piano sat inside a dispatch envelope heading toward 3rd Army headquarters. This is what Patton did. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the stories about World War II that expose what war does to discipline, survival, and the people trapped between them. James Carter, Cleveland, 31. He'd been a quartermaster lieutenant for 14 months. He'd seen burned trucks, frozen corpses, broken bridges, but he'd never seen a concert piano burning inside a French ballroom. The manor house stood 4 miles outside Metz. German artillery had shattered half the roof in November 1944. The owners fled during the retreat toward the Saar River. By January, 3rd Army used the estate as a temporary winter billet. 212 soldiers rotated through the building every 48 hours. Most belonged to supply and transport units supporting the advance east. The cold hit harder after sunset. Fuel deliveries kept failing. Snow blocked one road for 3 days. A German mortar strike destroyed another truck convoy near Thionville. 37 barrels of heating fuel never arrived. The soldiers adapted the only way they could. Fence posts disappeared first, then chairs, then bookshelves from empty guest rooms. Nobody filed reports over furniture. The piano changed everything. It sat inside the ballroom beneath a painted ceiling covered with angels and hunting scenes. The brass pedals still shined under the ash. One side carried deep scratches from soldiers dragging it across the marble floor. Carter reached the room shortly after 1 a.m. 3 enlisted men fed broken piano panels into the fire, while 17 others crowded around the flames, wearing blankets over their shoulders. Melted ivory keys pooled black residue near the grate. "Who ordered this?" Carter asked. Nobody answered immediately. One private finally pointed towards the staircase. Lieutenant Harris said, "We needed heat," he said. Carter looked towards the ceiling. Smoke darkened the paintings above the chandelier chain. The problem reached beyond property damage. French civilians still lived in nearby villages. 3rd Army headquarters already tracked 11 complaints involving looted homes during the previous month. Eisenhower pushed commanders to reduce civilian abuse reports before crossing deeper into Germany. Another incident could spread fast, especially this one. A burned piano, photographed well. A freezing infantryman beside it, photographed even better. Carter found Captain Robert Harris asleep inside a second-floor study at 2:10 a.m. Robert Harris, Philadelphia, 34. He'd been managing supply billets for 2 years. He'd seen artillery fires, collapsed hospitals, starving refugees, but he'd never seen officers arguing over whether a piano counted as firewood. The men were freezing, Harris said after Carter woke him. "The manor had furniture," Carter answered. Harris buttoned his coat slowly. The furniture was already gone. Carter said nothing for several seconds. At 5:40 a.m., he ordered photographs developed, attached a written report, and sent both directly to Colonel Edwin Mason at the Regional Logistics Command outside Nancy. Thomas Reed, Boston, 27. He'd been a transportation sergeant for 19 months. He'd seen frozen engines, overturned fuel trucks, shattered rail depots, but he'd never seen soldiers treated like thieves for trying to stay warm. Reed supervised the night fuel detail. He arrived carrying inventory sheets and 2 replacement blankets. The ballroom still smelled like wet ash. Half the piano remained near the fireplace. The gold lettering above the keyboard had melted black into the lacquer. 6 soldiers slept on the floor beside the embers. Lieutenant Carter waited near the doorway. "You signed the heating reports," Carter said. "You knew fuel reserves were gone." Reed folded the papers once before answering. "The men needed heat. You burned civilian property. We buried 2 drivers near Verdun last week." Reed answered. Their feet froze before dawn. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Snow blew through a shattered window behind them. One soldier pulled his blanket tighter without lifting his head. Carter pointed toward the piano frame. "There were doors upstairs," he said. Reed shook his head once. "Doors burn for 20 minutes. That piano burned all night." Carter looked at the blackened keys scattered across the marble floor. Then he closed his notebook. By noon, Reed walked out, went straight to Captain Harris. Captain Robert Harris gathered the senior non-commissioned officers inside the Manor dining room at 12:40 p.m. Rain mixed with snow outside. Water dripped through shell holes in the ceiling. The room temperature measured 34 degrees. Harris placed the photographs beside 3 casualty reports. 43 frostbite cases in 7 days, he said. 16 evacuation transfers. Lieutenant Carter stood near the fireplace holding the report envelope. Nobody touched the photographs. We cannot destroy civilian property every time supplies fail, Carter said. Harris answered immediately. We cannot ship frozen corpses home either. A mess sergeant rubbed his hands together beside the stove. His fingertips carried white cracks from the cold. Carter pointed towards the photographs. This reaches headquarters. We're finished. No, Harris answered. If headquarters ignores this, more men freeze. The room stayed silent for several seconds. One lieutenant unfolded a fuel inventory sheet across the table. Only 6 barrels remained for the entire billet sector. Harris finally gave the order. No more furniture fires, he said. We ration heat until new shipments arrive. And tonight, Carter asked. Harris looked towards the boarded windows. Tonight, we burn fence posts. The decision solved nothing. Fence wood would last 4 hours at most. The next convoy remained delayed another 36 hours because ice blocked the Moselle crossing. At 4:15 p.m., Harris signed a formal logistics complaint and attached Carter's photographs beneath it. Then he sent the report to Colonel Mason. Colonel Edwin Mason received the report near Nancy shortly after midnight. William Mason, Chicago, 42. He'd been managing supply corridors for 3 years. He'd seen retreat columns, amputations, burned villages, but he'd never seen a destroyed piano attached to a frostbite report. The colonel studied the photographs under a desk lamp. One image showed soldiers sleeping beside the burned instrument wrapped in curtains taken from the manor walls. Another showed a brass plaque mounted near the staircase. The plaque changed the situation. The house belonged to the Delacroix family before the war. Their oldest son joined the French army in 1940, escaped through Spain, then later fought beside American troops after Normandy. He died near Aachen in October 1944. The piano belonged to his mother. Mason removed his glasses slowly. A major standing nearby pointed toward the casualty reports. 43 frostbite cases in 1 week, he said. The lieutenant made the practical choice. Mason answered without looking up. So did every army that ever forgot where it was standing. The major unfolded another dispatch. Fuel shortages now affected 11 separate billets across eastern France. If headquarters punished the officers publicly, commanders elsewhere might hide future shortages instead of reporting them. If headquarters ignored this, civilian cooperation could collapse across the region. Mason understood both problems immediately. He signed the logistics request first. Then he wrote a second note by hand beneath Carter's photographs. For General Patton, personal review. The colonel stared at the burned piano one final time before sealing the folder. By the next morning, it was sitting on Patton's desk. Patton received the report at 3rd Army headquarters near Luxembourg shortly after 6:20 a.m. Snow covered the courtyard outside the command building. A coal stove crackled beside the wall map. The folder sat alone beside Patton's breakfast tray. He opened it without speaking. 3 photographs slid across the desk blotter. One showed the burned piano frame. Another showed soldiers sleeping beside the ashes wrapped in curtains. Patton studied the final photograph longest, the brass memorial plaque. His jaw tightened once. 2 fingers tapped the edge of the desk. Then he closed the folder carefully. 200 men froze beside a dead French boy's piano, he said to the aide beside him. The aide waited. Patton stood up and pulled on his gloves. Get my driver. A logistics colonel stepped forward immediately. Sir, Supply Command already filed replacement requests. We can resolve this administratively. Patton looked at him for several seconds. Paperwork never froze in a French winter, he said. Nobody answered after that. 20 minutes later, Patton's jeep rolled through the manor gates. Mud sprayed behind the tires. Snow clung to the wheel wells. Patton stepped out wearing a combat uniform beneath a heavy field coat. 4 stars painted across his helmet. Ivory-handled revolvers hanging low against his belt. The courtyard fell silent almost immediately. A corporal carrying fencewood stopped walking. 2 officers near the entrance straightened their jackets without speaking. 1 private quietly kicked a broken piano key beneath a staircase runner. Patton walked past all of them without a word. He entered the ballroom slowly. The piano frame still sat beside the ashes. Smoke stains climbed the ceiling above the chandelier chain. Melted ivory keys remained scattered across the marble floor like broken teeth. Patton removed 1 glove. Then he touched the burned piano with his bare hand. The room stayed completely still. Patton stood beside the burned piano for several seconds without speaking. Ash covered the marble beneath his boots. The chandelier above him swayed slightly in the winter draught. 1 broken ivory key remained stuck to the edge of the fireplace grate. Captain Harris finally stepped forward. Sir, the men had no fuel for 36 hours, he said. We already lost 43 men to frostbite injuries that week. Patton kept looking at the piano. Who ordered it? He asked. I did. Nobody moved after that. Lieutenant Carter stood near the doorway, holding the report folder against his chest. A private near the staircase lowered his eyes toward the floorboards. Patton turned slowly toward Harris. Did you ask the villagers for wood? He said. We searched every storage shed within 4 miles. And when you found none, Harris answered immediately. The temperature dropped below freezing inside the billet. Patton nodded once. The men needed heat, Harris added. I made the practical decision. Patton walked toward the fireplace. He bent slightly and lifted 1 blackened piano hammer from the ashes between 2 fingers. The metal still carried soot across the felt head. Then he spoke. "A frozen soldier is a tragedy," Patton said. "An army that burns another man's history for comfort becomes a gang with better equipment. Men who learn that lesson keep taking things long after winter ends." The ballroom stayed silent. Harris opened his mouth once before stopping. His hands remained fixed behind his back. Outside, somebody unloaded supply crates from a truck in the courtyard. The sound echoed faintly through the broken windows. Patton looked back toward the burned piano. "I know why you did it," he said. "I would have burned the chairs myself before letting men freeze." Nobody expected that answer. Lieutenant Carter lowered the folder slightly. One corporal near the staircase looked up for the first time since Patton entered the room. Patton pointed toward the officers standing along the wall. "But comfort purchased with someone else's history is theft with better manners." No one spoke after that line. Patton placed the burned piano hammer carefully on the mantel above the fireplace. Then he gave the order. "Replacement firewood arrives here tonight," he said. "Every enlisted man gets heat first." He looked directly at Harris. "And every officer in this billet sleeps cold for one night. You'll remember the difference between survival and convenience." Harris nodded once. "Yes, sir." Patton turned toward the doorway. "Nobody touches the rest of this piano," he said. "It stays here, exactly like this." By evening, 3 supply trucks unloaded fresh timber into the courtyard. The enlisted men carried wood upstairs beside smoking barrel stoves. The officers slept beneath blankets inside unheated rooms, while cold air moved through the cracked walls of the manor, and the burned piano remained alone in the ballroom. Patton left before midnight. He never looked back at it again. 2 days later, fuel convoys finally reached the billet sector outside Metz. Fresh coal filled the basement storage rooms. Army engineers repaired 3 shattered windows facing the courtyard. The ballroom stayed closed after that. Soldiers walked around the burned piano without touching it. Years later, Lieutenant James Carter later said, "I still remember the silence after Patton touched the piano. Nobody defended the fire after that." Patton never mentioned it publicly. In his diary, he wrote only one line: "Discipline dies one small permission at a time." The officers had not burned the piano for greed. They burned it because winter punished hesitation. Patton understood that immediately, but he also understood something larger. Armies crossed Europe carrying rifles, gasoline, and authority. Once soldiers believed survival excused every action, limits disappeared one object at a time. A chair became firewood, a piano became fuel, a civilian home became inventory. Would you have burned the piano to keep freezing soldiers alive? Or protected the house even if your men suffered through the cold? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about discipline, survival, and impossible moral decisions during World War II, make sure to subscribe.